Hey guys, and welcome to part 4 of how to paint Sepsimus the Plaguesworn. So this week we're going to be moving on to metals. So before we do the glazing on the armor, which I talked about last week at the end, we want to first establish some other areas on the model, because the colors we use on the armor are going to be affected by what else is happening. So at the moment that's all just blacky grey kind of color, and we want to put some colors on that so that we can see the difference and how things are going to contrast against each other. So for now we'll hold off on that, and we're going to work on the metal pieces. So we've got this sort of spear tip here. We've got the pieces on around his head there, on the shoulder pad and the gorget thing that's there. And originally I was maybe we're going to do these in a flesh tone, these little discs, but I feel to unify this and not jar your eye away from the focal area, which is up here, putting that flesh tone down here is going to distract your eye too much and move it away from the focal area, which is up here. Even though Nurgle would want you to be looking at the belly, but yeah, for the sake of the model, I think it should be metal. So we're going to do basically the spear tip, the shoulder pad piece there around the neck, these discs, the chainmail, the top knot piece there, and there's a hook that he's holding with those heads, and I think that's it. Oh, and then obviously little spiky things on the shaft of the spear. So that's what we're going to get into. If you haven't watched the Blight Kings tutorial, I do a kind of, I guess, brassy metal in that, and we'll be doing some glazing into that as well. So just like we do with the flesh and the armor here, we're going to be also adding those tints and colors into the armor. So we'll be doing that today, and getting the basically all the metals done. So let's take a look at the paints. So we've got the brass scorpion here for your brassy base tone, but you could use any brass, doesn't really matter. A little bit of black to darken it down, and then we've got some silver. I'm just using this, but you could use any silver you like. And then we've got our washes and shades. So we've got null oil, the sepia tone that I use. So I don't usually use a dark brown for this, because the dark brown tends to sort of move more towards black too much and doesn't give you the right kind of color. You want something that's a bit more mid-tone for the brown so that it actually shows up, especially on something dark or brassy like this. It's not even going to really show, but we're still adding it in anyway. And then finally, for all the tinting, we've got our usual suspects over here that we use all the time. So we've got a bit of green there, purple, yellow, magenta, and a blue. Okay, and then the blue is obviously a dark blue. It's not like an ultramarine blue. It's this nightshade here, which is a little bit deeper in color, and that's what we want there. So I've got everything set up, palettes ready. I'm going to prepare the paint, and then let's get into doing the base coats on the metal. Alright, so we've got our paint set up, we're ready to go. So just firstly we want to drag that brazen brass over a little bit, grab a little bit of the black here and bring it in. And we're just making a dark tone that's a bit darker than that brass, because the brass is a little bit light and we want it to be a little bit darker than that. So we're just getting to something like that. So there's no exact recipe here. We're just looking for something a bit darker than the brass. So as a good base tone, bit of water mixed in, a couple of drops to oil off your brush, get it ready. And now we can begin. So we're just going to come through and just base coat all these areas of the model with this darker brass tone. Okay, leave the area around these discs, because we'll probably end up staining those and doing some interesting stuff. So we'll leave that as is, but we'll just hit all these areas. Just get something a little darker before we put the main brass on. So just go through, drag it across the top like this on that chainmail, get it all nice and hit with that brass, but you can leave the black in there for the shadows, that's all fine. So you're just lightly dragging it across and you'll get that nice sort of look there, and we'll come through and I'll do all the rest. So when I come back, we'll move on to doing just this straight brass, just to lift it up, and then we'll move into the highlights. Alright, we're back soon. Alright, so we've got the base color down, and already you can see how much it's bringing it to life. We're just getting that nice contrast of the green and the red that's in that brass. We're getting a much more resolved finish now. So we can see that that choice to make those discs was probably the right one to go with the metal. It just unifies the model a bit more. You get to see more of that metal across the model. It's not just located on the upper part. We have a few more spots where it's being seen, and that just helps overall just to unify it. So now that we've got this base down, we want to now build out some of this brass. Just add a little bit of this straight brass in just to lift it in places. So this is kind of like our first highlight, I guess, but blend it in with a little bit of that darker tone, so it's like a little bit off. It's not quite the full color, so it's a little bit desaturated, I guess. And we're just going to be just gently brushing it just to build up a little bit more of that brassy tone just in and around the place. Okay. Basically a broad kind of highlight, just dabbing it around just to build up a bit more saturated color here and there on the tops of things, on the edges, just gently brushed on just to modulate that surface a little bit and lighten it up. You can leave like the deeper areas the darker color. It's just mostly on the more predominant spots of the model, just to give us something a little bit more full to work with, because it's a little bit thin. And although having the black showing through is okay, we just want a little bit more stronger tone, because our armor, the green armor that we have, is so strong and vibrant. We don't want the metal to completely wash out. We want it to at least compete a little bit with what we're doing. So it's just about just bringing that brass out a little and building it up and getting something that's a little bit more vibrant. So you can see, just so you get a bit more shine on there, you get a little bit more of the brassy tone. So I'll go through and do that, and then we'll move on to our highlight stages. Okay, so we've got now a brass tone that has a little bit of modulation in it. We've got a slightly darker and lighter version, and it's a little bit more saturated, so it's just popping a little more than what it was before, and so we get our good base to work off of. So now we're going to start bringing in some of that silver and highlighting it up. So we just get a little bit of this in, drag it in across so that we see something that's, just a sort of light copper, brassy, silver tone, something like that. A good maybe 2 steps up from the other color, but not too far. We don't want it to read as silver just yet. We still want it to feel a little bit like brass, and not too much on your brush. And then we're just going to lightly drag it across the top of this chainmail to start bringing it more towards the silver. Again, this is a Nurgle warrior, so we don't have to be super amazingly clean with any of these steps. We can be a little bit sort of painterly in our approach, because that's going to help. Nurgle is what it is, so you can have artistic license to, smudge things around a little bit as you see fit. But basically we're just hitting all of these edges now. It's essentially a line highlight, very similar to the way we highlighted up the armor, sort of little streaks and strokes. You're simulating scratches and little marks, little dings and bumps in the surface, little dots and little hashtaggy kind of cross-hatching that you'll do, and just building up the light around it on the edges where things would catch, under the lips of some of these little pock marks. Okay, light's coming from above, so we're hitting it on the undersides, paying attention to where that is. Not entirely, as I've said before, this is a stylized sort of paint style, so we don't have to be totally, doggedly adherent to that model. We can mix it up if we want to. Where this guy's from, chaos is just seeping through the land and causing all kinds of weird environmental shifts, and so light can be coming from practically anywhere, and so you don't have to be totally or it can be coming from internally within this armor. So there's all kinds of weird things going on here that you don't have to pay attention to all of the laws of nature and the way things work. That's part of the fun of doing chaos. You get to make up some of those rules and change things around. You know, it's part of the attraction of chaos. It's why the followers, one of the reasons why they go. It's not always power. Sometimes it's the illusion of freedom. They're, you know, coaxing you in because they're saying, hey, you know, you can do anything that you want. You can, you know, you'll never have to work for that baron or lord again. You know, you might be a peasant worker or something, and they're just trying to get you to do a thing. The Chaos Gods are just trying to push you along to be a pawn in their game, and so they'll offer you things like freedom and, you know, just this sort of defying the laws of reality, you know, and coaxing you in that way, and that might be, you know, really attractive. So here we have just those little highlights. You can see it's not doing a huge amount just yet, but you will see a difference in the color. It's a bit hard to see on this video, but it is going to start to brighten up. And then once we hit the next highlight, we should start to see quite a silvery look. So I'll go through and do that now, and when we come back, we'll move on to a more silver pass. Okay, so now we've got a couple of stages. So we've got the dark, the copper, and then a first little highlight there, just to bring up the surface and move it slightly away from straight brass. Now, before we go and do final highlights, we've got to get our ink washes on. So we're going to do our brown and then black ink wash. So we've got the sepia out here. I'm going to add a few drops of water in. Okay, bring it across. We're looking for something that's a little bit more translucent than the standard. So like, let's say 2 or 3 drops of this, maybe 1 to 2 drops of water, just to dilute it down a bit. We don't want to put it straight on. We want to keep a lot of this color. We're just looking for it's almost like a glaze really, and then we're just going to wash that on and start getting a little bit of darkness in there and depth into that color, and it's just going to bring a little bit of that saturation in. We can allow some of that wash to bleed out around in that inner area there. That's totally fine. We're going to be staining all this anyway, so it's all good. We don't have to worry too much about that inner area. It's all going to get attacked by various glazes in future passes. So we're just trying to get those shadows in. I'm just going to hit everywhere where we've got the metal to give it, yeah, just that little bump. And then we'll wait for that to dry, or near dry. It doesn't have to be completely dry. You can actually do this when the paint is basically dry, and then you can come in and start doing the black wash. So I'll go through and just finish it off now and show you what it looks like, and then we'll move on to the black. Alright, so that's pretty much all dried up, and so now we're looking at the black. So I've already set it up, added my couple of drops of water, just, you know, mix it around, make sure it's thin enough. You don't want the black too thick, because that's really going to ruin the overall effect. We're going to be coming in with all of those lovely, you know, purples and reds and yellows and so on to really deepen the color. So you don't need to get your full set of shadows with these passes. It's just basically to enrich the overall look and feel of your metals, so that they're not super clean. They got that nice deep oily rich surface, and that's really what you're looking for. And we're just going back over and doing the same thing we did with the brown. Okay, just running it around, deepening all that color, getting all those shadows, and making everything pop. And so once you've done that, we'll let that dry up, and then we'll come back in for our highlight passes before we do our glazes. Alright, I'll see you soon. Alright, and now we're into the highlight stage. So we've got that nice deep color, everything's looking pretty cool. you know, but now we need to get some highlights in there, because when we put the other glazes on, the colors, as I've said many times before, it's going to drop the lights down and you're going to get a duller finish. So we want to make sure we have a little bit of brightness there, and we want this to read a little bit more like metal and less like brass, so just a little bit more of that metal tone coming through. So we'll get some of this brassy tone over here, and then we'll get a little bit of the silver, and we'll mix it up, and we're looking for a bit of the black in there as well, just to desaturate it slightly. And then until we find a color that's a little bit brighter than what we had before. So I'll just prepare that, and I'll be back in a sec. Alright, and this is where we're going to get into the scratches. So I've got our lighter tone here. Now you could just go straight to a metal tone if you wanted to. For this one, just to make it different, we're going to go through these copper tones instead. If you want to see, I think a more, I think on the last one I did it with straight up silvers over the top, but I think this is a nice way as well, just to see how you can you know, vary up the way you approach it. There's many roads to achieving this goal. You know, you can do it in any number of ways. If you've got a particular way you like to blend up with metals, do that. This is just more about showing the glazes and the colors that you can get into these colors, more than necessarily which ones we're using here. So we're just coming along and just building up those silvery tones. But again, this one has a little bit more copper in it, so it's going to keep some of that copper tone there. It's not going to go straight to silver this time. And the main reason for that, I guess, also is to help keep the contrast of red and green that we've got going on. So because that copper does have a little bit of the red in it. So we're just, and with this color now, you should start to see the highlights come up. So we're just looking for those little tiny scratches, and you know, we're not trying to paint this all silver. Okay, we want to keep that color underneath. We're just trying to now get the idea that there's lots of little chinks and notches and pieces out of this armor that have come away, and just as old metal has, that has those little glints of where fresh marks have been made, and there are older marks that don't have that, right? So we're just coming around, line highlighting the edges, doing the little marks there, and so you end up with those nice little bright areas. We're probably going to go one more highlight after this, just to make sure it pops. And you can do things like streak it in these kind of motions, just like we did on the armor itself with the pale color. You can run your brush in these little streaky patterns and create scratch marks and all of that really cool weathering, just to bring out more of the silver. And so just go through and muck around with that. When you're coming onto the blade here, with the blade we want to see marks running in this direction, and the reason for that is the way a blade is shaped and the way it cuts. You'll end up with these serrations all the way down. If you have a look at your own knives in your kitchen, obviously if you're a young person, please do that with your parent, but if you're old enough to know how to go to the kitchen, you'll notice that the blades will have these little marks down the ends there, and so you want to try to simulate a little bit of that. It gives you that directional thing of where the cutting is happening, and also over time as this thing gets worn, it's going to end up with these sort of little brights and darks along the edge that are going to be in sympathy with those marks. So you'll see these little lines show up, and that way we can get a brighter, concentrating more on the edge, so that you get like a brighter finish where the cutting is still being done. It might be rusty over here, but this edge would be relatively clean because it is constantly doing cutting, and you know, this guy's in battle, so he's always using the weapon. So we try to just keep a lot of that bright towards the end and just bring it up like that. When you're coming down to your to where the edge changes, this plane change, you've got that see if I get that in focus. You've got that line there, and you just run it down there, and you'll get that little bit of bright simulating the light turning from plane to plane. And so you're just trying to do that across the model, hitting those edges, doing those little scratches, and build up that silvery tone. All right, I'll be back in a sec. And now we want to just put a final highlight in, just to really make this pop. So we can see there, got that light bouncing off it there, some nice little highlights. But because this guy is what he is, and he's like your character or your hero, we want to go a little bit further. So we bring some of this silver in, pretty much as is, almost none of the tint of the copper in it, just a little tiny bit. And this is what we're going to do, the very, very fine little points, just all along the tops, the edges, anywhere where the light is really going to hit. You don't have to go all the way around, just to really make the silver come to life. So little tiny dots and scratches, not everywhere, mostly across the tops. And you're just trying to make everything read a little bit brighter, just so we can see that silver coming through where it's worn away. As you turn the model around, you'll see little glints of light, little points of interest, just to make this thing feel like it might have been silver at one stage, or at least something a little bit more polished, and now it's tarnished and definitely seen better days. Nurgle's a very joyous and gift-giving god, but he doesn't like cleaning much, and I can relate. I'm not a big fan of cleaning. I don't know, when you meet those people in life that are like, just get down with some cleaning, they just love it, they can't get enough of it. Yeah, I've never understood that. So for me and Nurgle really go together, because not to say that I'm a slob, but cleaning's the last thing that I really want to be focusing my attention on. And I think most artists are kind of like that, or at least one of the funny things about that is, like, the only part of my life that I'll spend the most time cleaning or organizing or whatever is the artist space, the workspace. That tends to be the most sort of, I guess, efficient area of my life, because it's like, I guess, the one that you focus on most, right? But everywhere else can be in various stages of disarray. But the art space is always premium, and that's part of the trick of staying creative and keep up with your work, is to make sure you always have like an active space that can be used at any time. So the clue about that, you'll see that with our tradesmen. So if you go into a workshop, always the spaces where they work and where the tools are always very neat and organized. Now there might be mess around, but they're always able to get access to their tools, and they're always able to get access to a flat space or a workspace where they can do their job. And that's really important for trades. And it's the same thing with creativity. It's just that little thing that you run into when you're doing this type of stuff. But, everywhere else, not so much. So yeah, but we just want to come in here and just get those nice little highlights going. So I'm going to continue doing that, and it's just less on the model. You're not doing everywhere, just on the ends, just to really give a little bit of brightness there, so it shines a bit more. So when we put those stains on, we're going to see everything. All right, I'll be back in a sec. All right, and that's the final highlight. So now we're seeing a lot more silver there, yeah? So you've just got that nice bright pop of silver edging, just to let it compete and sit with that pale armor that's quite bright as well. And so we've got a good base now. And so now we want to just come in and build in some of those depths of shadows in that brass. And we've got our little host of washes here: purple, yellow, magenta, and blue. And we're going to now mix in the water. We'll start with let's go with some purple and just get a nice thin amount. We don't want too much on this. This is just a glaze, so we just get a very small amount on the brush, and we're just going to start dabbing that around in different places. And what the purple will do is it'll actually bring out more of the red in that brass layer, and so you're going to see these sort of pinks and interesting little colors. You can also now bring that up and around and into that green area there. Put a bit of that purple in just to start darkening that down, because we're going to come back and glaze that anyway, but while we're there we may as well just add a little bit of the purple in there just to shift it away from the green since we've got it out, because that will just deepen that down, so we start to see more of what the finished look will be like. And then just come in here anywhere where you want to go. Basically, it doesn't have to be everywhere. You can also streak it like little drips, do little dotting motions, whatever looks cool to you. You just run it along. We can come back in later with a little bit of when we do our final drips, and we'll add a few more just to really make it pop. You're looking for little deep areas where there's natural shadows away from the lights to help deepen all of that up, and you'll start to see some lovely colors start to occur. So we'll do some of that with the purple, just coming around, and you have to do everywhere, just a little bit on every part, and then we'll come back in with some reds and blues. Alright, and so we're going to start to see some of those deeper shadows move towards a red or a purple. You're going to see it there. You can see on the blade, got a few different tones happening, very subtle, soft little shadows of reds and purple. So that's really great. It's just helping to really lift and deepen everything down, because now the shadows have real color in them. And that's one of the things that you learn as you go along, is that the way light hits surfaces and the color of things, shadows are full of colors as well. It's not just dark for dark's sake. The more of that you add in your miniature painting, you have to go totally realistic, but the more rich the surface becomes, and your eye just rests on it and really enjoys everything that's going on there. Even if you yourself don't understand the fundamentals of what's happening there, your eye naturally is going to read all of that for you, and just give your brain that response that yes, this is a really satisfying thing to look at, and you'll read it as a much nicer object. So as that's drying, it's all pretty much dry, but you don't have to wait till it's totally dry. We'll do some of this blue. We may not need the magenta, because as I said, the purple reacts with what's already there and turns to a kind of reddish tone anyway. So I've just mixed in some of the water here to keep it diluted. A little bit on the brush, not too much. Make sure you got your point, and we'll just start dabbing this around anywhere where we're still not seeing dark enough shadows in any of the little pockmark holes, or you want to run. This blue's the perfect one to run little drips and stuff on the metal if you want to do that, because it should show up quite nicely. So we definitely want to put a little bit of that in. Any little shadows and little spots that you feel like aren't quite dark enough, or you want to add some grit or grime to, then start using that blue, and that's going to really just make everything feel really weird. A little bit like, it's going to give you the impression of like heated, when metal's been heated a few times and it has that little discolorations in it. You get a bit of that going on in this, which is actually quite nice. You're trying to give the impression that this metal isn't exactly normal, and that there's something very odd going on with it. And things like little colors like this really help to sell the idea of this metal going through processes that aren't normal, where the metal is being left in a very unusual state that you wouldn't normally see, rather than just simulating normal rust and normal kind of stuff that you would see on any metal surface. Trying to mix it up with all of these vibrant colors in there really helps give you the idea that this is actually something very chaosy going on. It's not normal. The erosion isn't just normal erosion like you would see on any surface. That's something that I think can sometimes get lost in a lot of these kinds of paint jobs, is that we forget that the decay and the things that are going on with these creatures is not natural, and that it's actually being caused by something very out of this world. And so to only simulate those natural things, you really lose a lot. If you read any of the stories or listen to any of the audiobooks that talk about the stories, they talk about that. The armor is, you know, sentient and has a life of its own and is constantly writhing and changing and warping and doing all these strange and interesting things that just aren't, I guess, you know, not always shown on models, either by the sculpting or just in general with paint jobs. And so one way that you can get a little bit of that in is via this type of method of adding lots of little glazy colors in and just trying to mix it up a bit and give the surface that little bit more interest than what it had before. So you can see me here just dotting around and, you know, just adding some of these little colors in and trying to get as much variety into that surface as possible, just feathering it in. You know, if I see a little bit of purple, I might put a bit of blue next to it, you know what I mean, just to break it up and just add a little bit of those colors in. So as you're moving around, you'll start to see them. It's a little bit hard to see on this camera, but I can assure you they're there. In the natural light, you'll see it. It is obviously going to dull down a bit once it dries, which is totally fine. This is just the subtle impression of colors. We're not trying to overstate it. We're just trying to give little areas of the model that are just a little bit nicer and a little bit interesting for our eye to rest on as we look at it. And that's really the whole goal. So I'm going to go through and just finish that off, and we'll come back in for the final one with the yellows. And so finally we're going to add a little bit of yellows in very carefully. This has to be very watered down, 2 or 3 drops of water, very small amount on your brush, okay, because this will change the color very quickly. But we're just going to just dabble a little tiny bit of this yellow in here and there into shadows and highlights, just as a interesting little piece. Not too much, just little bits here and there, little tiny dotty motions, nothing too crazy, just a little bit here and there, little pops of yellow. It's very careful work, but it's just adding just that other hue in there just to break up the surface. So it's not very much at all. A little bit in the base of where your highlights are, like that. It'll go both yellow and green. So we're probably not going to use any of the green ink because we're going to see a little bit of that green here and there as we move around, because some of this is desaturated and has a little bit of that black in it, and that actually then turns it to green. So we don't need much. We're just dabbing a few little spots of yellow just to add that in, because we have that in other areas. You're gonna see a bit more of that yellow as we build up the flesh tones. A bit more of the yellow in the flesh will show through, especially with the little pustules and so on that are on the ends of the flesh. On the surface of the flesh, and that is going to link well with this yellow that we see up into the metals. And it's an unusual color. You normally don't see this type of yellows or whatever in metals exactly. So it helps also signify that something a little bit weird and wonderful is happening, you know, on this metal surface that wouldn't otherwise occur. And that's really the point. We're just trying to give ourselves free license to just vary up this surface and not be straddled by the constraints of a Sigmarite world that needs to be ordered. We're chaos here. Nurgle lets you live freely in your pustules and your boils and your little pot bellies. He wants you to go out there and have fun. So that includes not being constrained by color and having whatever you like occur at any moment, at any whim. And he'll do anything that he wants to you as well, which is part of the deal. But it just helps break this up, and we end up with something where we're going to see some interesting stuff going on. It's all going to tie together. So as I said, these little yellow spots will just get that down a bit. There we go. And just lay it in. And so that will eventually tie in with a few more yellows that we'll see on the skin once we come to that final stage, because at the moment there's not much yellow there, but there will be once we're finished. We'll have those little sores and so on that'll have a bit of yellow in it, and that will tie back into the yellow that's up here. So that's why we have to do this in these kinds of stages, because we have to see the colors interacting with one another. We can't just go and totally finish everything or whatever, especially for the skin and the armor, because that's how we're going to tie this together. So we've got the cues now from the metals, which look really beautiful now. At least I think so. I think it's a really cool look for this guy. Actually, we'll just pop a little bit of yellows just down in here as well. But yeah, that's basically it. So at the end of this, I'll show the overview and the recipes for what we've just done, and hopefully that's helped. And next week we're going to be going through finally glazing the armor and getting that to a finish point. And if we've got more time, we'll start putting the base colors down for some of the other areas, and then after that, the next weeks after that, it'll be all the secondary details in the base. So that'll then finish off the model. So we're going really well. I think it's looking pretty cool. So yeah, at the end, the overview, a better picture of this, the recipe, and I look forward to getting onto that armor next week. So enjoy your day, guys. Hit that subscribe button, notify button, all that kind of stuff, because it really helps me out. But otherwise, I'll catch you on the next one.